So UFC 284 is coming up early next year in February, and I really cannot wait for this card, but I feel like the card isn't finished yet. We've only got 10 fights on the card, and this video is not just going to be about let's find an Australian or a fighter from New Zealand. I've even got a fighter from Samoa, which is in the Pacific Islands around Australia and New Zealand on this card. It's not just going to be about let's find an Australasian fighter that can fit the bill and fight in the UFC 284 card. I'm also going to be talking about the Australian and New Zealand prospects, I think are the guys to watch out for around this kind of area in the world. I'm from New Zealand, so I watch a lot of Eternal MMA, a little bit of Hex Fight series, but it's on pay-per-view, so I normally just have to find a replay somewhere, and kind of a bit of stuff like that. So I'm a little bit up to date with who's the top prospects around this sort of area. There is a couple of really great prospects out to injury, a couple of really great prospects have fight books, so they're not going to be able to make it for a quick turnaround at the UFC, so I've kind of taken that into consideration as well. So let's just quickly go through the card. It seems like so far almost every fight except for Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett has got an Australian fighter on it, which is kind of crazy, and I feel like we're probably going to see Dan Hooker on the card. You've also got Kai Kara France on there. Sorry, he's not Australian, he's from New Zealand. And a couple more fighters, maybe you see Carlos Ulberg or even like Mike Mathitha, also known as Blood Diamond, on the card as well. Maybe he'll open up the card. But I feel like they're missing one thing, and I know Shannon Ross is making his debut, but I feel like they're missing in bringing someone in to make their debut in their home country. Like when they did the France card in Paris, they brought in William Gomez, and he made his debut as a Frenchman. And they also brought in quite a few people from that sort of area, fighters from the Netherlands, fighters from just around France, so I feel like maybe they could bring maybe one or two fighters in from around Australasia to make their debut. So that's a 2-minute intro there. Let's just stop wasting time, and let's talk about Steve Erceg here. He's my first one on the list, not really in a particular order, but I feel like the first few are guys that you really realistically could see in the UFC, maybe not in February, but very soon. Steve Erceg is a guy that had a fight booked. It's not on his Tapology page, but he actually had a Dana White's Contender Series fight booked against Clayton Carpenter, and it was actually the first Dana White's Contender Series fight that was booked in 2022. I covered it here on the channel, and yeah, we look at Steve Erceg here. He's actually got a really well-aging win over Young-Guk Choi, who's doing really well in the Road to UFC series, and he's also got a couple of really good wins over Shannon Ross, who's going to be making his UFC debut. Paul Logue is a pretty solid fighter as well in the Australian regional scene, and he hasn't fought in 2022. This guy is fresh. He had a Dana White's Contender Series fight booked, couldn't make it due to visa problems. No visa problems if he's fighting in Australia, and I feel like Steve Erceg is potentially just a shoo-in to get into the UFC. If not, maybe they can make something happen elsewhere. But Steve Erceg, apparently he's been trying to get fights and everyone's been turning him down. So UFC, I don't think they're going to find too many people that will turn down Steven Erceg's debut. So yeah, let's just get him in the UFC. The next one, he's from New Zealand. I'm from New Zealand. Matt Vaile here, 12-2 record. And he has a couple of decent wins in his record here. The problem with Matt Vaile is he is only on a 2-fight win streak, and he has only fought a couple of times over the last few years. But I believe he's fresh. I believe he's ready to go. He's coming off a win over Will Chope, who's a pretty solid guy around the world, and he fights all around the world, fights anyone, anywhere. Kind of a cool fighter to follow. He lost to Takashi Sato, who has been cut from the UFC, so unfortunately that is a pretty poorly aging win. But he does have good wins. Brogan Anderson's a very good win that has aged well. Brogan Anderson's on this list as well, because he's gone on a very good run. Kit Campbell's a pretty good win. I mean, just beat Will Chope in the first round. This guy is ready for the UFC, man. He's 31 years old. He's in his prime. He's from New Zealand. I think it's time to make something happen. Now we move on. Rod Coaster is the next one on the list with a 7-4 record. He does not have the best record in the world, but I'm telling you, this guy is good. He's only on a 2-fight win streak, but his last 2 losses were to Jack Jenkins, Michael, and Khan Offley, who were just more experienced opponents, and he also lost to the same guy twice. Way early on in his career, 2014-2015. We're talking about a legitimate Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu player here. I do believe he's done grappled Jiu-Jitsu internationally. This guy's really good. He submitted Sean Etchell in the second round, and Sean Etchell was given an opportunity on Road to UFC in Singapore. Unfortunately, he lost. But Sean Etchell's another guy that, you could put into the UFC if potentially he won the Road to UFC fight, or if he beat Rod Costa. So we're talking about a good level of competition here for Rod Costa. Not the best record in the world, but I think he's justified to get in the UFC at some point. Maybe if he defends his belt for Eternal MMA 1 or 2 more times, you're going to see this make him debut. Justin Van Heerden, this guy's going to have to make a quick turnaround, and he is from South Africa, but he does fight out of Australia. He does live in Australia. And he's on a very good win streak right now. He lost to Rod Costa, who I was talking about before. Rod Costa, very underrated record. But he's gone on a pretty good win streak. He beat Alan Philpott and Muhammad Alavi, who was 7-0 at the time. Maybe if Muhammad Alavi won that fight, you would see him on the list. He's taken on Diego Pereira earlier in December, so once again he is a guy that would have to make a very quick turnaround, but maybe if he wins that fight, gets on the mic, calls out the UFC or something like that, potentially you could see him make a quick turnaround debut. Maybe it's not realistic for him to fight only a couple of months after, but because it is in Australia, it definitely takes moving internationally and taking about a week of travel out of that, so maybe you could see Justin Van Heerden make his debut. Next one is Blake Donnelly. This is a little bit of a long shot. He's not too experienced, 6-1 record, and he is on a 2-fight win streak, and he did lose to Dimps Gillies in 2020. But since then, he has gone on a 2-fight win streak, a pretty good win over John Bruin, and I feel like if he had that fight against David Martinez, that would have been a really great opportunity for him. I think he might have actually been the one that pulled out of the fight. No, it was Martinez that pulled out of the fight. Sorry, so Blake Donnelly's fresh and ready to go. Maybe it's a little bit too much too soon, but I feel like maybe you could see him make his debut. Brogan Anderson, out of New Zealand, another New Zealand fighter, 15-3 record, very, very experienced on the regional scene. He's 33 years old, he fights at light heavyweight. I think he might actually be fighting at middleweight these days. No, he is fighting at 205 still. And he's got good wins on his record, man. He's got a loss to Matt Viley, and Matt Viley's on this list. And since then, he's gone on a really nice win streak, against good competition, 9-3 record. Pane Haraki, arguably not a very good fighter, unfortunately, these days, because he is almost 40 years old. But I think it probably was just a case of no one wants to fight Brogan Anderson these days. I think it's time to maybe make Brogan Anderson step up in competition, get him in the UFC, 15-3 record, experienced MMA record, 15-3 is an amazing record as well. He's from New Zealand. You could build another New Zealand star out of Brogan Anderson. I understand he's 33, and maybe he doesn't have too many years of prime left, but I think now's the time to sign him. Let's get him on the Perth. I feel like it makes sense. The next one here is Jacinta Austin. She's got a 4-0 professional MMA record. I understand that's not too experienced, but it is at women's strawweight, it says on Tapology, but I feel like she's more fighting at flyweight, but maybe she can fight around the weight classes. And she's only 4-0, I understand, but she does have a kickboxing and boxing background. She is winning boxing and kickboxing fights. But the point is, I feel like maybe she's not quite ready for UFC right now, but I thought that maybe she would be something to put on the list. Someone to put on the list, or someone to look forward to. Maybe if she wins a couple more fights, you could see on Dana White's Contender Series or something like that. And Jacinta Austin, I think, could be a very good prospect. Josh Togo, 12-4 record. This guy isn't the most active fighter in the world. No, he is. Sorry, I got confused with someone else. He lost to Dan Hill, who was undefeated at the time. And he's gone on a 3-fight win streak, including a win over Tahir Abdullayev, who was 13-1 at the time. That win was recent as well. This guy's fresh. This guy's ready to go. This guy's ready to make a turnaround. It would be about 5 months out of his last fight if he was getting signed to the UFC. I don't know if he's got an exclusive contract with UAE Warriors, and if he does, that could be a problem. But if he doesn't have an exclusive contract with UAE Warriors, man, you really could see this guy potentially fight in Perth next year, or just get signed to the UFC in general. I'm not too sure about Josh Togo's age, but I think he must be in the prime around now, so I think it's time for him to go. Caleb Rideout, 7-2 professional record, a young guy. I feel like this guy might need a couple more fights to develop. He is winning close decisions against fighters, which maybe he shouldn't be, like Kevin just say. But I feel like maybe, man, give this guy a couple more fights. You're going to see him ready for the UFC. He's 25 years old. Maybe give him a little bit more time. Maybe the UFC returns to Perth next year, or they return to Melbourne next year in Australia. Or maybe it's such a hit that they just return back to Australia at the end of this year, and you have Caleb Rideout fight on that card. So I'm just thinking, man, can maybe give Caleb Rideout a little bit of time, but you might see this guy in the UFC eventually. Junior Tuffer, another little bit of a long shot because this guy doesn't have one fight booked. He's got 2 fights booked in the future, man. This is absolutely insane. So he's winning fights, and he's been a glory kickboxer. I believe he's got really, really good kickboxing accolades, and now he's come into MMA. He knocked out a guy with a losing record in his debut, took on a very experienced guy, knocked him out. took on David Taloa and isn't a boxing fight, knocked him out, and now he's fighting Nicholas Drvivic. I definitely said his name wrong, with a 4-3 record on Brave, and then he's going to be returning. He's actually fighting David Drvivic, this weekend. I need to keep that in mind and watch that card. But then he's fighting Tsuyoshi Sudario, who is a very, very hot prospect right now in the heavyweight division. Tsuyoshi's a sumo wrestler, and a very tough test for Junior Tafa. But if Junior Tafa can beat Tsuyoshi Sudario, he will be only 4-0, but his brother was signed to the UFC early, and Junior Tafa does have that glory kickboxing background. And he's got his brother in the UFC as well. I mean, that helps him make a case too, doesn't it? Like, if he beats Tsuyoshi Sudario, who's such a hot prospect right now, he beat an undefeated fighter in his last fight. We're talking Junior Tafa in the UFC very soon, so why not just make it in February? I mean, the fact that he's fighting back-to-back, like a month back-to-back, and he's just fighting so often, I feel like we could maybe make an assumption that he would be ready to fight in February. I understand that it'll be short notice for him and short notice for his opponent, but maybe it's something we could make happen. John Varkey here, 14-6 record, very experienced fighter, and he made a return to MMA after a couple of years off. Maybe this is a little bit of a long shot one for Varkey, because I feel like maybe he potentially made the return to MMA for a different reason, unfortunately involving his brother, and City Kickboxing made headlines for that because they were trying to campaign for something to be done about that situation. But John Varkey, man, he beat a very good opponent in 10-4, Andrew Mills, in his last fight by decision. Maybe if he's going to be committing to MMA a little bit more, maybe if he gets a couple more wins. He's 31 years old, he's in the prime of his career. If he's interested in pursuing MMA, and he's out of City Kickboxing as well, if it's something that he wants to do, maybe you could see him in the UFC at some point. Ignore PFL, I don't know why I had that open, and listen to the last one here. You got Mose Afoa here. He's a heavyweight, also a light heavyweight. Sorry, a braces got caught. This is a long shot, man. It is. I mean, I think this would be a great signing for the UFC. Although he doesn't have the highest level of competition on his record, to be fair. But mostly Afoa, I feel like it would just be a great signing for any big promotion, for people from the Pacific Islands to see someone from Samoa. You know, like we saw Sam K out of Tonga fight in PFL, and he was having a lot of success on the feet against, I think it was Juan Adams he was fighting, former UFC fighter. And mostly Afoa, man. A Samoan fighter, 7-1 record, 7-1-1 record, but he's not beating the best competition in the world. He lost to Brogan Anderson. That happens. And then since then, he's just been knocking guys out silly. But then he did go to a split draw with a guy with a losing record earlier this year, which I know is a pretty bad look, unfortunately, for him. But he's 31 years old. The UFC does need heavyweights. The UFC does need light heavyweights. And I think this Mose Afoa, being from Samoa, this will be the UFC's first ever Samoan fighter. I think it might even be the first ever fighter out of the Pacific Islands for the UFC, and I feel like maybe if you see Mose Afoa in the UFC, potentially it could pave the way for people from the Pacific Islands to maybe pursue MMA, pick up MMA and train MMA, and maybe take it a little bit more seriously because they could look up to someone like Afoa here. I know it's a little bit maybe a long shot again, because once again he did have an 8-11 draw, and also he is not beating good competition at all, but maybe, man, maybe. I know that's a long shot. A lot of these guys are long shots to be signed to the UFC 284 card. I think Steve Ursig is one that makes the most sense. Matt Vile makes sense as well, in my opinion. I even think Brogan Anderson as well makes a lot of sense. I would like to see this guy in the UFC. We'll see what happens, man. I mean, I wouldn't even be too mad if Rod Costa got signed as well to the UFC. Junior Tafa as well, I feel like is a guy that maybe you could see in there, but I thought I'd just make this video. This is a showcase of the best New Zealand and Australian fighters, but also kind of like who I think maybe, like potentially you could see UFC pick up and sign for this card. There's a couple of great Australian fighters signed to ONE FC right now, but they're probably on exclusive contracts, and I don't know if the UFC would want to go in a bidding war against ONE FC for their fighters. So we'll see what happens, man. This is such a great card, and I'm just excited to see maybe they sign someone. Like, as I said, they signed William Gomez and someone else to fight on that France card. There are a few people actually to fight on that France card from the Europe area, or from that area. So I think it makes sense. Maybe they sign 1-2 guys to the UFC to fight on this card, make their debut on this card, and maybe see where they go to from there. But I'm looking forward to it. You do have Shannon Ross making his debut, but he's coming off Dana White's Contender Series, so it's like almost different, but if not the same. Jimmy Crute making a return after his injury. Joshua Colabell's on a pretty good streak right now. Justin Taffa. Man, I feel like I just overrate Justin Taffa so much, but I feel like he's going to knock out Parker Porter here, man. I really do. Jack Jenkins is really good. He's got a very winnable matchup, and Don Chinese ahead of him. Kai Kara France versus Alex Perez is going to be a banger. Pedro versus Zhang is going to be a banger. All 9 of Tyson Pedro's wins are in the first round. All 16 of Zhang's wins are in the first round. I cannot state that enough. That's insane. Robert Whittaker versus Paulo Costa is a great fight as well. Rodriguez versus Emmett's a very good fight too. That's for the vacant, not the vacant title, sorry, the interim title. While Volkanovski goes for lightweight gold. I think it just makes all the sense in the world. Volkanovski, if he's able to beat Makhachev, defends his belt against either of these two, and then maybe defends his belt at lightweight if he wins. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this, man. I really am. So yeah, I thought I'd make this showcase video, and we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching.